that this is a collaboration between the ASI and the University of Pennsylvania. So it's very much a cooperative project, and we greatly appreciate the work of all of the students, colleagues, and others who've been involved in the project. So what I'm saying today is not, of course, simply, my own work without a lot of other people. Okay, so the project, South Indian Landscape Trajectories, involves a comparison of two regions, one of which is the area in and around Brahmagiri Hill, which you can see in this image on the right side. And our goal is to study long-term land use and social transformation, as you heard in the introduction, over about the last 5,000 years in and around this important site. My plan for you today is this. I'm just going to very briefly recap some of the points that Mark Lysett made in part 1 of our joint lecture, very briefly. And then I thought I would just focus on 2 specific kind of new understandings that have been emerging out of the 4 seasons of fieldwork. First, a point about ash mounds and Neolithic settlement at Brahmagiri, and then a little bit more obscure, I think, in some ways, some potential revisions to the occupational sequence as we understood it. When I started writing this talk, I thought I would say a lot more about ongoing and future research, but of course, I ran out of time. So just to let you know that the work that I'm talking about is very much still in progress, that we have a lot of analysis ongoing of plant and animal remains, of paleoecological indicators, ceramics, and a lot of work to do on dating and various other things. So this is very much, in between, I would say, just in progress. Mark showed this image before, but of course, one of the interesting things about the site of Brahmagiri is that it's been the focus of research for over 100 years, beginning with epigraphic work by Mysore State in the late 1800s. I spent a little time in the early 2000s, working on some of the ceramic collections, which I'll talk about today a bit. And then the Silk Project has now had 4 seasons of field work between 2023 and 2025. So there's a long history there. Of course, the most famous work at Brahmagiri is still the 1947 excavations by the Archaeological Survey of India under the direction of Mortimer Wheeler. So if we look at this map here, you can see the red box. So that's that same hill and reservoir you saw before. The red box is the area where the 1947 excavations were concentrated. And the map at the bottom, the close-up map, is drawn after the publication in ancient India from the 1947 excavations. As you can see, that's only a small part of the region that we're studying. And it turns out that there's actually a much longer sequence of occupation. So it's important to remember that this project, although it was very famous, was just a short season, 1 3-month season. And of course, 1947, it was a very busy year and a lot was going on. And at that time, they did not screen or collect plant and animal remains in a systematic way. And of course, the focus of the project, as I'll talk about in a minute, was on stratigraphy rather than structures and features. And then critically, of course, 1947 is before the development of radiocarbon dating. Okay, just to recap then, as I think we all know, one of Wheeler's primary goals in working at Brahmagiri was to try and place the South Indian megaliths chronologically. So his real focus was really on megaliths. They mapped 3 areas of megaliths and excavated 10 megaliths. But of course, there was, again, no radiocarbon dating. And so in order to date them, he and his team worked to correlate the ceramics they found in the megaliths with the stratigraphic excavations in what he called the Isila town site. So you'll be very tired of this section by the time I finish my lecture. But this is a very famous BR21 section that showed what he called the succession of 3 cultures within the region he called the Isila town site. So he referred to these as Stone Axe, Megalithic, and Andhra culture. This is now what we would call Neolithic, Iron Age, and early historic. So again, okay, so that's just setting it up. And then if we look at the megalithic, what he called the megalithic culture, which is obviously, what he associated with the megaliths, you can see that he dated the megaliths by ceramic cross dating between just two of the excavation units that they did, BR21 and BR22. And the megalithic culture, if you look at a little bracket there, is nowhere found by itself in this diagram. It overlaps completely, either with Stone Axe or Andhra, right? So there is no independent, level that is not, in his view, mixed, right? So this assessment was based on ceramics. I will talk a little bit about ceramics at the end, and I'm, sorry not to make it too boring. But it was based on this assessment was based on some particular ideas about ceramics, including an idea that black and red ware could be differentiated between different time periods, and that it was absent in the Neolithic, and also that a type of pottery called russet-coated painted ware, RCPW, was solely associated with what he called the Andhra or early historic. Okay, so that's ancient history. Now let's move on. So new research at Brahmagiri, there are a couple of big appealing aspects of this, and I'm just finishing up my recap of Mark's talk, really. We have a 5,000-year-long history here, like we did at Karnataka, really, of farming in this semi-arid environment. It's an opportunity to address a lot of important issues using new methods that were not available to previous archaeologists. As we'll see, Brahmagiri has unusually large and very complex Neolithic deposits. We knew, of course, that there was a lot of Neolithic there, but it turns out to be even more than we expected, right? There's famously a very large megalithic complex, and there's an Ashokan edict and a very large early historic settlement that has been identified as Isila, the town mentioned in the edict. There are not that many of those in this region, so that's very interesting. And then there's a very large, a very good shape, early medieval city of Hanea, which was not studied at all before. And then not least, we're very excited about the opportunity to work with a variety of students and trade students in this project. Okay, so the Silk Research Project has different phases. And as I said, we're not anywhere nearly finished now. We begin with mapping and surface documentation and really trying to develop a robust system of spatial control so that we could have an integrated GIS database that would be not only for our work, but for all previous work. We've been doing a lot of remote sensing for non-invasive mapping. We have been working to integrate and update previous research, relocate and redescribe features and structures, study the surface artifacts, as we'll see a little bit today. We've done some work cleaning and sampling exposed sections from old excavations. And then more recently, we've started a program of test excavations across the whole site. I don't have that much to say about that yet because we've just back from the field only a couple of months ago. So you'll have to stay tuned for that one. We're planning larger scale excavations and, of course, analysis, publication. Okay, so today I just want to focus on two things because it's complicated enough, I think. Two new findings, let's say, or new-ish findings. One, first of all, is about the Neolithic. So the Neolithic settlement, and those are just, your standard dates for the Neolithic. I'm not saying that we have material from all of those periods. And let me just stress again that we have some new radiocarbon dates, but mostly we have not yet gotten the dates from our recent work. So again, we're still waiting on certain dates, okay? However, the Neolithic settlement was very extensive, especially on the eastern slope of the outcrop. And as I'll talk about today, this eastern slope, which is the area of the 47 excavations partly, also contains numerous ashments. That's my first point. point. The second thing I'll talk about is Iron Age, or megalithic in the 1947 parlance, is that Iron Age deposits are certainly present at the site, but probably not where previous scholars have suggested. So again, we'll go back to that famous BR21 section. Okay, so the first point then, the Neolithic. So if we look at the distribution of Neolithic ash mounds, of course, ash mounds are one of the most famous, elements of the Southern Neolithic. They're only distributed in a limited part of peninsular India. This is that very famous map that's been redrawn and rewritten in a more recent version, Peter Johansson. But you can see this map of the distribution of ash mound sites that Brahmagiri has always been understood as a Neolithic site, but one without ash mounds. As it turns out, however, Brahmagiri has many ash mounds, probably around 10. And this map, which you've seen before, is again shows the area of the 1947 excavations in the red box. But based on our surface work in 2023, we documented 9 ash mounds, mostly along the eastern slope of the hill, one over on the northwest that had been noted already by Arjun Rao. And obviously these red dots are not to scale, but you can see that that's a lot of ash mounds, and that they're distributed, interestingly, along the foot of the slope, or as we now know, a little bit up the slope, some of them. And some of them are partially buried. All right, so that was a little bit of a surprise from the 2023 season. When we think about Neolithic ash mounds, we tend to think about mounds like this one, the famous Kudetini ash mound. That's a power pole next to in the photo, so you can get a sense of the size of it. That they're very tall, they stick up above the landscape. And so our ash mounds are a little bit different because they're often covered with a lot of deposition from the hill above, and are not, obtrusive in a way that some of the other ash mounds are. So how do we find them? I want to talk a little bit about the process as well. Some ash mounds in the course of systematic documentation of the surface, we found some ash mounds exposed in natural drainage channels. So water really rushes off this outcrop and cuts through. And you can see here, for example, ash mound 7, that's exposed in a drainage channel. Others were exposed in farmers' ditches. Farmers have dug various kinds of drainage ditches around the site, and those have actually been extremely helpful for us in terms of, taking a peek beneath the surface. So these can just see some pictures from the 2003 work of various kinds of ash mound deposits and various ash mounds exposed in some of the farmers' ditches. Here's another one, what we call Ash Mound 1, or Silt Feature 114, that's also exposed in a ditch. And in 2025, January 2025, in collaboration with ASI, the ASI cleared back a section, about a meter wide section of Ash Mound 1 here, and excavated a little bit down to the natural soil. So you can see Ramesh here setting up the tapes and so on. So we do not yet have dates from Ash Mound 1, but we did cut back the section, draw the section, take some samples. So we have samples for radiocarbon, pollen, phytoliths, micromorphology, and some macrobotanical analysis. So that's still in progress. But an interesting thing about the Ash Mound 1 section is that there are at least 8 separate episodes of ash mound construction identified in it. Here's a photogrammetry image of the section, including 3 post holes and 1 small pit, each one of those associated with the surface. You can see this maybe a little bit more clearly with my pictures of people out of the way, so I can see what I'm doing in the profile. And let me just say, a lot of these profiles are still in progress. We're still busy drafting things, so please forgive any infelicities. In any case, the profile of Ash Mound 1, the red arrows you see are all on surfaces. So and several of those surfaces have post holes in them, including one here we can see 7 that has multiple layers of resurfacing in the post hole. So what this suggests is that ash mound surfaces, relatively level ash mound surfaces, were used and had, in some cases, prepared surfaces on them with structures, and that were used by people in various ways. And then more ash mound deposits were built on top of them. I said I wasn't going to talk about the test excavations at all, but I'll just quickly show you a couple of images from BRH 108. BR was the old term, but now ASI has asked us to add a letter, so now it's BRH. BRH 108 is on that eastern slope, and this is, I believe, surface 1, it's right underneath. Okay, yeah, surface 2, sorry. This is in an ash mound. And you can see a prepared surface, and it has 3 features that have little pits, some with vessels in them and some without. There's a kind of more action scene of excavating of those features. So you can see that the ash mound is not just a kind of formless monumental structure. It's a living, working surface in certain ways. All right. On that same topic, we did some section cleaning, as I told you. So if you look in the upper right, you can see that's the Wheeler map. You see it says Isila town site. And circled in red is BR 17, one of the excavation units. On our orthophoto on the lower right, you see it again, circled, BR 17. And if you'll look at that photo carefully down in the lower right, you'll see that there's variation in color in the field. The base soil in this area is all red soil. It's very, very bright red. So where there are cultural deposits, it tends to be a little bit different. But you'll notice that there are some white areas there. And it's not too much of a surprise if you know that those are areas where we do find ash mound deposit popping out. Okay. So in 2023, we cleaned back the BR 17 section. And I say partial depth because we did not, those units were left open for more than 70 years. And of course, you can imagine they've slumped quite a bit. We did not excavate anything new, even though it's back dirt. So it's not quite as deep as Wheeler got, right? But what you'll see in the section drawing on the left, the kind of gray areas or speckly gray areas are layers of ash mound deposit. Okay. So what we can see, here's the BR 17 photo on the right from the 1947 report. And those thick white layers were described as clay floors. They're definitely not clay, but they're certainly ash mound material. Okay, so you can see then a picture a student took of, it was very tricky to try and clean that back. It was a mess of the various ash mound layers as corresponding to our new section. And I also got a date from samples collected by Wheeler and graciously given permission by the ASI to send out I put it right here, layer 10 that comes at a nice 1623 to 1501 BCE, good Neolithic date, right? So there were ash mound layers in the exposed sections in the past. It's just that they didn't recognize that they were ash mounds. What's also happened here is that this eastern slope, and there's the picture again on the left that you saw before, this is an aerial view down, is that eastern slope used to kind of go down gradually where those fields are. And when I first visited Brahmagiri in 2000, that's how it was. Sometime in the 2010s, though, the farmers leveled out the fields and stepped them down, terracing them. So what that did was expose some new deposits. So you can see in the photo on the right, by trowel and a GPS in the 2023 season, we saw ash mound material popping out of the surface in a way that wouldn't have been visible before the farmers terraced down the slope. So there's clearly a lot more under there that was only become visible because of the recent changes in the slope. Okay, all of that is very, opportunistic, but that was the basis for the work that we did on remote sensing. So we have started using ERT to study map subsurface deposits. This was new to me, so let me just quickly explain. So ERT is electrical resistivity tomography, and resistivity in archaeology, ER, which we're also doing in other parts of the site, resistivity traditionally operates at a uniform depth, right? Defined by the spacing of two probes that are inserted into the ground at regular intervals, usually 0.5 meter or 1 meter. So this kind of resistivity survey, calling it traditional now, is a really valuable tool because it's pretty simple. It can cover wide areas, and it allows us to kind of see, let's say, discrete near-surface features like walls and roads, buildings. We're doing a lot of that across the site. But what resistivity can't do, though, is to tell us much about deeper deposits, right? It's very much focused on the near surface. ERT, on the other hand, and you can see the setup here in the image, it's very complex, gives us the ability to produce what are called pseudo sections, like fake, virtual sections in a way. They're long, skinny slices of vision underground. And the pseudo section data give us information about the depths and the vertical relations along the transect lines. And that allows us to identify large-scale variations in subsurface deposits. So ERT is not particularly good at locating things like buildings or structures. That's what the other one is for. But it can really resolve variation among large homogeneous subsurface deposits. And if you think about what an ash mound is, it's a large homogeneous, in this case, subsurface deposit. So let me just show you a little bit of what we've gotten with the ERT work and give you a sense of what it looks like. Here's Garima running the ERT line along the tape. You can see she's standing near farmer's ditch there, running the line out across the field. You can see it going out across the fields there. We also ran the ERT up the slope of the hill into this very important area that has not been documented prior to our project. A very densely occupied residential area with lots of masonry alignments, looks like a bunch of cobbles in the photo. And you can see my student Mariah McKenna then running the line up the hill. And what we get from this is something like this. So you see all these red lines. These are ERT lines that we ran last season. And the colors indicate the nature of the subsurface deposit. So just very roughly, the blue is rock, more or less, right? And we've come to understand that the red is ash mound material. And so to the extent possible, we are trying to correlate these subsurface ash mound deposits with where we see ash mounds in excavations, in the farmers' trenches, and so on. And if you look, let's zoom in on one of these transects. So it goes across the hill, down the hill, out into the field. And you can see when we get off the hill, we get past the blue stuff. And you can see the red is ash mound deposit. And there's a kind of break in it that's the damage created by the farmer's slope, so the farmer's ditch. So if we zoom in on it even a little bit more, let me go back. So there's the rock on the left. Let's zoom in on the right part. You can see even the kind of break that's created by the slope. So we're working hard to extend this and try to understand the distribution of ash mounds across the whole area. So let me just give you a little illustration of the process then. These blue dots that you see here are GPS points that I took on ash mound 1 as it was visible on the surface, because it pops up through the surface in various places. Now if we add red dots, sorry, they're a little hard to see, of ash mounds identified in the surface survey. So I showed you a map with red dots before. These are more to scale. These are various kinds of ash mounds that we noticed, right? And then if we add to that areas of ash mound that we identified in the ERT, which we've made into little yellow lines there, you can see that that extends a bit using the subsurface, what we saw before, and that gives us a current estimated ash mound area on the east side of the outcrop, which is, quite extensive. So this is, it's still work that we're in progress. We have a lot more to go, but we're really, I think, going to be able to come up with some good understanding of the distribution of ash mounds. Another thing that we're doing, of course, is to do analysis of the contents of the ash mound. As I said, the dates are not back, so sorry. But we have very preliminary analysis of pollen and phytoliths from the ash mound deposit, in particular from BR17. So that was from the scraping back of the old section. So you can see this is just a picture in the lab of the pollen and phytoliths. And just very briefly, see, how am I doing for time? We found that there were very high concentrations of phytoliths for, I think most people know, but just in case you don't, phytoliths, of course, are silicate bodies formed in plants. And if you think that ash mounds are partially or largely composed of dung, animal dung, and which is highly siliceous, right? So what we found is that ash mounds are mostly phytoliths, actually. So they're very high concentrations of phytoliths. There's a lot of grass, culm, and leaf short cells, and a low proportion of inflorescences. That's like the, flowers and seeds. So it suggests that animals are eating these grass. Not surprising, if they're cows eating grasses, but not that many flowering seed heads. There are some woody indicators in the phytoliths and some burned phytoliths. On the pollen side, I don't know why I went from right to left, but we find relatively low concentrations of pollen, but not no pollen. A very high proportion of grasses, which is what you would expect from dung. Also present the pollen of some palms, some sedges, acacia trees, the Amaranthaceae family, which little herbaceous things, and then also some typha, or it's a semi-aquatic plant. This is very preliminary. And then finally, we also find in the pollen samples the fungi of dung-specific, dung-loving or coprophilous fungi. So these are fungi that live exclusively in animal dung, which makes a lot of sense. We're wondering at this point if the pollen and phytolith data are going to give us information about seasonality. It may be, but we still have a lot of work to do there. Okay, so let me just sum up a little bit about what we found about the Southern Neolithic at Brahmagiri so far. We've found that there's a very large, very complex area of ash mounds on the eastern slope. That's the area I showed you. And then a much smaller one that I did not show you on the northwest side of the outcrop. We don't know yet if there are Neolithic deposits on top. That's a whole nother story. We've also found that some levels from previous excavations have unrecognized ash mound deposits. I showed you BR17, and I'll show you BR21 in a minute. Okay. So the ash mounds are not it's not like they were lurking there. It's just that, and we found them. It's just that some people didn't recognize what they were, right? We've also, and we're working on this now very carefully, found that ash mounds have very complex histories. They have histories of construction, of use, of reuse, of layering, and from both multiple excavation units and from sections, we've seen that many ash mounds have prepared surfaces on the top. So if you think of it not as a mound, but as a series of surfaces or layers that have floors, nice prepared floors with post holes, pits, and other kinds of features. This suggests, of course, that people at Brahmagiri, they lived on, used the level tops of ash mound layers, as well as other kinds of spaces. So the ash mound is not separate necessarily from their life in general, which is different than some scholars have interpreted. And then just again, a disclaimer that we still have a lot of data to do. Okay, now I'm going to, let's see, running short on time. So let me kind of quickly go through the second main finding. And that has to do with the kind of conventional interpretation of the site as a succession of three cultures within the Asila town site, right? You've seen this again. I'll show you it one more time. The Stone Axe, Megalithic Andhra or Neolithic, Iron Age, Early Historic. That's this very famous section drawing from BR 21. And actually, importantly, the only section drawing published from the entire site. So if we go back to the 1947 excavations, it was only BR 21 and 22 that showed what they considered to be the full sequence. BR 21 and 22 are right next to each other. You can see it's circled in red there. BR 17 I already talked about, also circled. There was a little trench joining BR 21 and 22 called 21AB. It had what they said was a stone axe burial urn in, quote, an otherwise megalithic level. 16A and 16B, which were excavated by Mysore State, were entirely stone axe or Neolithic. And it's important to note that that unit abuts BR 21, right? So it's right next door. And 23, which is also very close by, the argument was that there was just slight occupation in the megalithic, but stone axe and Andhra, BR 17 stone axe Andhra. So it was only actually 2 units that showed what has come to be the conventional understanding of the cultural sequence. In 2005, I published an article based on several years of reanalysis of the ceramics from the BR 21 section that were in the Karnataka collections of ASI. These are the original figures from that article. They're obviously not very good. I need to redo them. But you can see an interesting thing here. Let me tell you what you're seeing. This is that same sequence, BR 21, the same levels and everything. These are Wheeler's ceramics. What I was very surprised to find was, first of all, medieval earthenware in that. It never mentioned the medieval, and I had been working on medievals, quite surprised. I also found RCPW, which I certainly expected to see, and the kind of conventional understanding is that it's a marker of the early historic, so it should really map onto what Wheeler called Andhra, and then also BRW. Okay, I got a radiocarbon date from charcoal collected by Wheeler, and that was pit 3, sealed by layer 3. That should be Andhra, according to the Wheeler, and it came out as AD 1190 to 1280, so that's early medieval. Okay, so the red lines that you see in this graph are the area that's identified, the layers that are identified by Wheeler as Andhra layers, and you can see there's nothing like they're not. So my conclusion in 2005 was then first that some or maybe all of the Andhra layers, and maybe even some of what he called megalithic, are really medieval. And secondly, that RCPW seems like it might continue past the early historic period. And indeed, since then, we found that RCPW has been found elsewhere well into the medieval periods, maybe as late as 15th century. There's some later dates, but they're a little bit suspect. And this is work that's primarily, that's been done by C.S. Umbly from the ASI, along with me, understanding the chronology, social, and economic significance of this RCPW pottery. Okay. All right, so in 2023, I cleaned back part of that famous BR 21 section. If you look at the photo on the right, you can see what it looked like in 2023. It was left open for over 70 years. You can see on the left that my section cleaning was, it was just a small part of the original unit, and it was a little rough because of the slumping. But if you look at that section, what you see is a good part of the middle of it is ash mound material. So BR 21 also contained significant ash mound deposits like BR 17, but again, they were not recognized as such in the original interpretation. So here's my preliminary inking, it's not quite finished, sorry, of the BR 21 section cleaning. Again, I didn't get quite as deep as Wheeler did, but you can see that the uppermost ash mound layer, where the red arrow goes, corresponds to level 7 in Wheeler's profile, which he identified as Chunam. Well, you can understand why he maybe thought that, but it's definitely ash mound material. And then what was thought to be the megalithic culture, the red lines in the diagram I showed you before, was levels 4 through 8. So we don't have dates yet, but considering that there's ash mound material in this layer, again, it doesn't really seem like it's probably not megalithic or Iron Age, but let's see. Okay, so then I'm almost finished with this. Hang in there. What we see then is two things. What was thought to be Andhra or early historic, the top part of the sequence there. Now we have 4 radiocarbon dates. One at the top, 1190 to 1280, is the one I reported in 2005. And we have three more dates that are basically the same. The little asterisks mean that those are samples collected by Wheeler. The lab assured me there was no problem. The one without the asterisks is one that I collected in 2023, and you can see it's very consistent with all of that. So it seems to be early medieval on the top, not early historic. So if we think about this section, then I propose, I just made this for you, no one's seen this before, a revision of it is that we have early medieval deposits and Neolithic deposits, or in Wheeler's terms, Stone Axe and Andhra, which is very consistent with what he saw elsewhere on the site. What that suggests, though, then, is that his megalithic culture as such here is not, that there is no Iron Age deposit in this particular section. That doesn't mean there's no Iron Age anywhere on the site, but not here in this section. Okay, so why is this important? I mean, it is very kind of, only people who work on this should care. But I think it's important for several reasons. One is that in South Indian archaeology, we keep using some of the same kind of problematic diagnostic criteria that they did, more than 70 years ago. And we know better than this. So first of all, we know that time periods are not the same as developmental stages. So when I say the Neolithic, what I mean is a chunk of time. So if you find, for example, something in this chunk of time, iron, let's say, or something that doesn't seem to belong to it, that's a whole, belong, that we need to rethink that. Okay. So we can date material now quite independently of artifact classification. And it seems like a lot of our understandings of the artifacts as temporal diagnostics are wrong, right? So it's quite clear now, both from my early work and especially the work of Ambali, that RCPW is not a unique identifier of the early historic, right? It continues much, much later. So it's not surprising that we find it in early medieval levels. BRW, as we know, as many people have said, has a very, very long history. It also occurs in the Neolithic. So having BRW does not mean it's not Neolithic. And certainly much more awareness of medieval ceramics is needed. I think a lot of the lack of research on this has meant that a lot of things are misdiagnosed. And also, and I could have more to say about this later, quantitative analysis of ceramics are needed, not just the presence or absence of certain types, but often it's more a matter of proportionality. So I said I wasn't going to get a lot of time to talk about the future, and I haven't because I talked too much about the other things. But, looking forward with the project, we're really enthusiastic, of course, about getting more dates, and we're going to get a lot more. But especially the moving beyond chronology is the question. That is, establishing a sequence at the site. Of course, it's important, but we have a lot of other questions we'd like to ask. We're very enthusiastic about getting the results from the environmental analyses and the artifact analyses. Those take a long time, but they're starting to be interesting. And then, of course, continue excavations in diverse contexts. So that's all I have. And I would be happy to take questions if anyone has them.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these wonderful insights into your research. I hope there would be questions, or we are ready to start with the questions. I request all the participants, if you have any questions, please type in the Q&A chat box. We can take it one by one. Good
There
to-
is one in the chat box.
Okay.
There are two in the chat box now.
Okay. Yeah. You can take it.
Okay, the first one is from Professor Prakash Sinha, who asks, did you find phytoliths of palms and especially of bamboo or not?
We did not. We found phytoliths and pollen of palms, but no phytoliths of palm or bamboo. But I will stress again that it's a very preliminary analysis, that it's in no way complete.
The next one, yeah, I can
Go
read them out. The next one is by Ajay Kumar Ramamurthy, who asked whether any occurrences of shell that imply networking with seashores in the Neolithic period at Brahmagiri.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We do have shell, that's for sure, from the Neolithic deposits, but they haven't been taxonomically identified yet. So there's nothing that I don't think, I would have to check, that is, someone might correct me, but I don't think we have anything that's definitely ocean shell. But again, it's, we haven't done a thorough analysis yet.
Okay. There's one question in the Q&A box from Shikha. She thanks you for this wonderful talk. And she has a question regarding hydrology. What is the nature of the Vedavati River? If it is a seasonal river, how do people at Brahmagiri manage it?
Sorry, can you say that again? What?
So she has a question about water management, hydrology, and the nature of the Vedavati River. And if it is a seasonal river, how did the inhabitants at Brahmagiri manage this seasonality?
Yeah. There's a very small river called the Chikahagri that is on the north side of our survey area. It is seasonal. We saw it running quite rapidly this summer for probably the first time in my experience of 25 years going to the site. But it is not a perennial river like, say, the Tungabhadra, right? So as far as we know, as far as we can tell, and we have some more analysis to do, is that people primarily did not use that river for, or, stream really for irrigation, but used capture of runoff from the hill. In that part of the country, those gigantic granitic hills provide, amazing kind of watersheds. So in the rainy season, water runs off the hill. It also percolates through cracks in the granite and comes out. And we were able to actually watch the movement of water through the sediments at the base of the hill after some huge rainstorms, because we actually saw some of our units flooded from below as water moved down through the hill. So this is very much all about seasonal capture of rainfall. There's only southwest monsoon here, so it's not a river kind of situation. What about phytoliths? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, please go ahead. Yeah, it's just a follow-up question from Professor Prakash.
What about phytoliths of wild rice and cultivated? We did not have any rice phytoliths at all. And again, I would be a little surprised if we had some in the Neolithic, but not, shocked. Again, it's just very preliminary, but no evidence for rice. We certainly have a very big plan of botanical analysis ahead of us, and we've done a significant amount of flotation this last season. So we should be able to start getting a lot more results soon.
We've just wait for a few.
There is one more question.
A minute or two more.
Okay. So I have a small question. I mean, what do you think about the recent early chronology for ions, the Iron Age or whatever? I mean, in South India. I mean, what is?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I would say that iron is one thing, and the Iron Age is something else, right? That we tend to sort of mix those things up, right? And I noticed actually in some of the publications that a date that I got on megalith 6 at Brahmagiri, that was Wheeler's material. It was a late Neolithic date, and it was in a megalith, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that the Iron Age dates to that because it's in a megalith, right? At Mosky, they found megalith-like things that date to the late Neolithic. And also we know that megalith builders like to put ash mound material in megaliths. So that I would say is ambiguous. But that's not the question you ask, I know. You're asking about, evidence for early iron in Tumulad that has been recently published. I would say two things. One is I'm agnostic. I'm like, let's wait and see. They have, I think the dates themselves seem perfectly, convincing. But of course, a radiocarbon date is only as good as its association with the object, right? So I'm sure those dates are fine, but is the object actually associated with that date? It's only one date out of a whole range of others. So I would say we need to wait and see on that. However, I will say that the larger, in some ways, I almost feel like the extreme claim is obscuring the larger point, which is that iron production is very early in South India. We have early iron in Kathleen also, not that early, but still. And there's no doubt, in my mind, that iron production in South Asia starts in the south before in the north, right? I think making extreme claims minimizes that important point. And maybe they're right. We don't know. I'd like to see more evidence for sure. However, I think it is correct that people are making iron objects quite early. I'd like to see us try to separate that from, ideas about time periods. So if you found iron in something that's supposed to be Neolithic, does that mean it's not Neolithic? That's the Iron Age starts. I mean, to me, the names of the periods are just conveniences. If you have iron in the Neolithic, it's still the Neolithic. Just have iron. But in any case, yes, there is early iron in the south for sure. Let's see how it comes out.
Yeah.
No other questions right now, but in case the audience still have any, we request them to quickly put it in the Q&A or the chat box.
So one more question came to my mind is that how can we associate the rock art in those regions? To which time periods, or does it extend over a very long time period, as you say also about the russet-coated black and red ware?
Yeah. As you know, rock art is very hard to date, right? I mean, unlike artifacts, which you can find in stratigraphic association, we very rarely get rock art that way. At Kathleen, we had beautiful rock art, and we found in a well-dated Iron Age level a piece of ceramic that had almost exactly the same style, a little drawing on it of a little person. That was cool because it suggests that probably that rock art was also dates to the main Iron Age occupation. We don't get that kind of thing very often. As you know, some people have done like direct dating on rock art material. We've never tried to do that. That might be interesting. There's a lot of rock art at Brahmagiri. And my guess is that it was made over a really long period of time, because there are some that are just like little stick figures or little white lines and things. But then there are other areas where we have very elaborate designs, like caparisoned elephants, sort of two fighters with swords and elaborate outfits. Those seem to be much later. But again, I don't know for sure.
Are you also planning to do some pigment analysis? Like, I mean, we have now Raman spectrometry, and also.
It's funny that you should ask that. Ambali just did some pigment analysis on the RCPW.
Okay.
And we're working on an article for that. We have not worked on rock art, however. So But if you know of anyone who has a special interest in rock art, we would be.
I was thinking this for over a long period of time, because nowadays handheld Raman is available. If that can be done, maybe we can understand the range of pigments used in this rock art, and maybe a chronological sequence can be developed if we see variation in the pigments, right? Over a period of time, new pigments come.
Yeah, I think it would be a great project. You're welcome to come down and take a look at our rock art.
No, why not? I mean, yeah, it's a wonderful tool, I believe. I think it's less used in these contexts so far. I think it's a good scope. Any other?
There is one more question in the Q&A from Shikha. What is the present land use pattern around Brahmagiri? What kind of crops and pasture communities move around this place?
It's changed a lot. Even in the 25 years that I have been going there. If you look back to the mid 20th century photos, it's entirely dry farmed, right? So it was mostly then, millet and pulses, and a little bit of cotton. However, in the last 20 years or so, we've seen the extension of bore wells and electric pumps. So what's happening now is a lot more irrigated crops from bore wells and pumps. That's also been a bit damaging to the archaeological record. And so now people are growing all kinds of things. On the dry farm side, they're growing a lot of peanuts now, but also millets and pulses. In areas where they have irrigation, there's a little bit of rice. There's also a lot of corn, maize. Interestingly, that's quite new. They're still growing finger millet pretty extensively. Some of it's irrigated, which is interesting. So it's a wide range of things now, and the pattern has changed so much because of the introduction of deep wells and electricity. Mobile pastoralists also do move through that area. We see them seasonally. And of course, villages also maintain quite extensive herds. So the hill is grazed primarily by goats. It's not that friendly to cows. So there are a lot of goats in the region.
Yesterday, Shoemaker was showing me a video where they were going up the hill, and there were about 100 cows, cattle moving up the hill as well.
There are some cows. Yeah.
A very narrow path with these steep, step-like features, and the animals were making their way down, I guess. So very interesting that they take them to the top of the hill for grazing. Not so much at lower levels.
The goats every day, the cows only some days, but
someday.
The hill is very challenging in many places.
Yeah.
And it has some very elaborate medieval buildings and things up on the top. So we're planning on working up on top of the hill next season. It's going to be exciting. And looking at some elite medieval deposits. I also see someone ask, what is low proportion of inflorescence mean?
Yeah, that's the last question.
Inflorescence, like just the fancy botanical word for flowers. So
flowering.
On a grass, the inflorescence is the flower and seed, and then eventually the seed head. So what that suggests is that animals are eating the blades of grass, but it's not probably at a time when they're blooming, which is why we're wondering if we can figure out seasonality from it.
I don't think there are any other questions.
I have one more small query. So you mentioned about the medieval structures on the top of the hills, right? I mean, so what could be a mechanism to store water on those hilltops, and how they could have sustained those settlements?
There are several tanks up on top of the hill. And in 2014, we actually excavated one of them for botanical paleoenvironmental study. There are some water storage facilities up on top of the hill. There are also, a whole variety of little tanks along the bottom of the edge of the hill as well. So people were well aware of runoff coming off the bottom of the hill. And most of these little tanks at the bottom, I think, are early medieval. So people were capturing that water and using it, for all kinds of purposes. So it was a very ingenious, use of runoffs that people have. And I'm sure that there were wells as well. We just don't really see them.
Thank you. So I think we
All right, we're
don't have, we don't have questions. And so I thank you once again, Professor Kathleen, for this wonderful talk. And I also thank all the participants to have logged in and listened to this talk. And I welcome all of you once again for the next month's talk also. I mean, we'll be hosting more talks in the coming months and different topics. And I would like to see all of you again. So thank you once again, and thank you for your time. And you are welcome to our center, and we can really collaborate and look into more aspects. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate everyone's attention. And let me just once more thank my colleagues at the ASI and all of the wonderful students that we have working with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Bye-bye.